It's 1:30 now, so I'm going to make a start. Welcome everyone to the very first Environmental Policy Implementation Community Workshop. It's great to see so many of you here today. My name is Ellie Savage. I am the Policy Officer for EPIC at the Institution of Environmental Sciences, and we also have our wonderful Policy Lead, Joseph, and Communities Lead, Ethne, from the IES here today. So in today's workshop on local nature recovery strategies, we really want to focus on how LNRSs can deliver on their potential to enable and drive nature recovery. How do we plan for success? And how do we avoid having really well thought through, brilliant, high quality documents that just end up sitting on a shelf and not being used? So what can you expect from the next hour? It's pretty jam-packed. We've got a lot to do. We'll first hear from three excellent speakers, Sam Evans, Matt Browne, and Sachi Shah, and I'll introduce them properly in a moment. Then at 2 p.m, we'll go into breakout rooms to have a wider discussion. Then at 2:20, we'll come back together, hear feedback from the breakout rooms before finishing at 2:30. Just to flag, there is no Q&A time for speakers. So if you do have a specific question, maybe a technical question for them, if you just pop it in the chat, and I'm sure that they'll try and answer it at some point throughout the workshop. EPIC is planning to produce a summary of the discussions held here today. So to receive this, do make sure that you're signed up to a mailing list if you're not already, which Ethne should be putting in the chat now. So without further ado, I'll pass on to our first speaker, Sam Evans. Sam is the head of the natural environment at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and leads their work to improve the city's natural environment. Prior to that, Sam led the development of the Mayor's 5-year, held various roles in the civil service, most recently as head of strategic coordination at DEFRA. So over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Ellie, and good afternoon, everyone. As Ellie says, I head up the work in Greater Manchester Combined Authority on all things natural environment and nature recovery. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview into what LNRSs are, what we're going to be doing in GM, and how we see them, as Ellie said, not being a very well thought through document that just sits on a shelf, but actually informing delivery that it needs to do to turn around our decline in biodiversity. So just to set the scene a little bit, and LNRSs haven't appeared out of thin air, I guess, and they trace their origins back to the Lawton report, which I think is probably about 13 or 14 years old now, that talked about how we plan for nature and create spaces for nature that are bigger, better, and more joined up. That was reflected in the government's 25-year environment plan and fed through into the Environment Act that is now 2 years old and set out the requirements for local nature recovery strategies to cover the whole of England. And they're part of a key set of measures to deliver on the government's environmental improvement plan, turn around the decline in biodiversity and the environment in a better state for the next generation. So what are local nature recovery strategies? They are a new system of statutory spatial strategies for nature and environmental improvement that are mandated under the Environment Act. They're all about showing where and how we should be taking action for nature, but also to provide the wider benefits we know that nature provides. DEFRA has designated, I think, 48 areas called responsible authorities to lead preparation. So they will have complete coverage over the country. And the strategies will need to be updated and reported on. And there's also an enhanced biodiversity duty on public bodies under the Environment Act as well. So what they are and what they're not, I guess, is an important distinction to make. So they are strategic documents, but they should inform delivery on the ground, including things like biodiversity net gain and the Environmental Land Management Scheme. They should be locally led, they need to be based on evidence, and they need to be co-produced with a range of input from a range of different stakeholders. But they are not delivery plans. They don't bind, for example, landowners to do certain things in certain ways. They don't include new areas of protection or prevention of different land uses for different purposes. And they don't give permission to create new habitat or do things without going through the appropriate consultation or legal process. So given that, the role of the strategies really are to be that updated spatial plan for nature recovery in a particular area. And for us in Greater Manchester, they will build on existing plans and strategies. We were one of 5 pilots a couple of years ago to test this process for DEFRA, so we'll build on the learning from that, but we'll also integrate it with the plans that our 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester, including Manchester City Council, have developed for their areas. So we'll build on existing plans and strategies, set out an overarching vision and targets for nature recovery in the city region. It's really designed to drive action, collaborative action, focused action for nature across a range of stakeholders, and to be that evidence base that informs other plans of local authorities, of businesses, third sector organisations and funding decisions. And leading on from that should help us plan where investment should be prioritised. So what areas are particularly important to help nature recover, to connect spaces up for nature, but also for people. And we also hope it will promote wider engagement with nature across Greater Manchester as well. So to produce one of these for Greater Manchester, we'll be going through a set of key steps, really. The first being to map where is already good for nature. That's the basis of that nature recovery network in the city region, includes the sites that are already good for nature and are protected for biodiversity. Then we've been looking at the opportunities and the issues in Greater Manchester for nature and have published a State of Nature report setting some of that out. Then we've collaboratively with a range of stakeholders agreeing the priorities and opportunities to tackle some of those issues. We'll then work out the practical actions for delivering those and map those on as opportunity areas. So we'll have those core areas, but where are the opportunity areas to create new habitat, to improve habitats and connect those up to make a coherent network for nature to recover. And we'll also need to set out how that strategy will be monitored, and as part of that process, undertake a public consultation as well. So a bit of a process really that we're going through. We've sort of been progressing since the summer, since we had the sort of green light to start progressing, getting things like stakeholder engagement right, building our evidence base, building up our aims of the strategy and the vision, now making our way through the kind of middle row, which is all about agreeing those priorities, agreeing how we're going to map opportunity areas before we draft the strategy and go out to public consultation later this year. And every area across the country will be going through a similar process of developing a strategy, developing a draft, getting lots of input on it, and then consulting the public on that at some point before a final strategies are published, probably towards the start of next year. We've also been doing a lot of work to get the public involved in the strategy. We've run a series of profiles on local nature champions to help spread the word about the strategy and some of the practical actions that people can take to support its delivery. And we put out regular newsletters and have had regular kind of other engagement sessions, for example, with farmers and landowners to help get their input as we start to develop the strategy. So moving on to how LNRSs will inform delivery, and there's kind of 4 areas that I wanted to briefly focus on my last few slides, and some of these you may have already come across. So local nature recovery strategies will help inform the delivery of biodiversity net gain. That came into force for new developments across England, most new developments across England last month, and means that each new development will need to deliver a 10% uplift on biodiversity as compared to before the development started. Areas identified as opportunities within local nature recovery strategies will create more units than they otherwise would have if they weren't designated as opportunity areas. So that will help prioritise the delivery of biodiversity net gain in those areas identified in the local nature recovery strategies. We just need to manage that difference that biodiversity net gain is already up and running, is already starting, and it's going to take most areas another 9-12 months or so to get their local nature recovery strategies in place. So we'll have a bit of a gap before that happens. It will also, secondly, inform the delivery of the new environmental land management scheme and the government's kind of proposals to put more funding into to farmers and landowners to manage land for the environment rather than just paying them for the amount of land they own, which has happened previously. So environmental land management scheme will pay farmers for environmentally beneficial activities, and it is hoped that the LNRSs will increase that collaboration across area, increase the understanding of what's required in certain areas. But the government's still exploring exactly how it's going to align funding initiatives like the environmental land management scheme and local nature recovery strategy. So again, similar to BNG, a bit of a bedding in period before that join up really happens.
Hi, Sam. Sorry, 2 minute warning.
Yeah, there's also a link between planning and LNRSs, local planning authorities, which we have 10 of. Our 10 local authorities in Greater Manchester have to have regard to the local nature recovery strategy in terms of their local plans, and all local authorities are in different stages of developing their local plans, may have adopted them, may just be starting to develop them. So again, there's a bit of an issue there, again, similar to BNG, around the timing of local nature recovery strategies being developed, local plans in different points in their development, and government needing to issue further guidance on exactly how this will work in practice. But really, I think the greatest power comes from local nature recovery strategies inspiring and engendering that kind of collaboration across different parts of the economy of society and all those different people who need to take action to turn around the decline in biodiversity. That can range from our water companies, our transport providers, how we integrate nature-based solutions along streets and highways, how our community forests are going out and planting and contributing to national tree planting targets, how our businesses can green their activities, green their estates, and how our public services, public bodies like the NHS can green their practices and their estates. So we're hoping that the strategy will inspire a range of different organisations to corral behind them and take action and integrate the LNRS into their plans. So final slide for me, just what we're doing next really. We've launched a public survey to engage residents. We've just published our first State of Nature report, which I can pop the link to in the chat. We're developing those opportunity areas and maps, and that will all lead up to the kind of publication of a draft strategy for consultation in the early summer. So hopefully a snapshot into what local nature recovery strategies are and some of the work we kicked off and will be doing in Greater Manchester to develop ours, and that will be being replicated across the whole of England. Thank you very much, and back to you, Ellie.
Thanks, Sam. I think that was a really useful start to the workshop. Next, we have Matt Browne. Matt oversees the policy and advocacy outputs of Wildlife and Countryside Link, England's largest environmental coalition. And during the passage of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, Matt led successful efforts to amend the legislation to give LNRSs greater weight in the planning system, which I'm sure we will hear more about very shortly. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Great, well, really nice to be here, and really inspirational actually to hear from Sam about how the LNRS is working in Greater Manchester on the ground. I'm just going to add a few quite policy-focused suggestions on how we can make sure that that kind of success is replicated across the country and across the LNRS areas. So the organisation that I work for, well, I've kind of said Link. We are a large coalition, and we bring together lots and lots of environmental charities and ENGOs, large and small, to try and make sure that policies improve for nature. And our North Star, our guiding principle, is the target which was put into the Environment Act to halt the decline in species abundance by 2030. That gives us effectively 6 years to try and make sure that nature stops its decline and is turned around. So that was when we petitioned for that target in 2021 with various cross-party supporters, the government said yes. Lots of people signed a petition in support. Some of them may even be on this call. Thank you very much if you did. So we now have a really good nature objective in law, and we have to try and meet it. LNRSs are a really important route for meeting that target now that it has been set in law. Now, they've got a huge role to play in making sure that species start to be more abundant. Each LNRS is encouraged to have a list of species for the local area that could really do with being boosted. And as Sam set out, a key part of every LNRS is making sure that there is a map of key nature sites in the area that can act almost as a redoubt for these species to take refuge in and then to start to spread out from. If you get LNRSs right, you can really go quite a long way to recovering species abundance and making sure that nature recovers by Nature 2030. Now, of course, these maps, again, as Sam and Ellie have set out, they are only as good as their practical impact. A map gathering dust on a shelf is not going to be good to anyone. How do you make sure that maps have practical impact? Well, the planning system is the main control on how land is used in England, so LNRSs have to have good, strong planning weight. When they were initially enacted with the Environment Act, I'm afraid that wasn't really the case. It was a little bit of a fudge, the wording of the Environment Act, as to how strong local nature recovery strategies should be. My organisation and lots of others spotted the opportunity of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which came along in May 2022, introduced to Parliament then as a major planning reform of effectively finishing the unfinished business of the Environment Act and making sure that LNRSs actually had some weight in planning. There was a long campaign, which I won't bore you about, working with all sorts of cross-party MPs and peers to try and get the government to accept an amendment which would give LNRSs a bit more planning weight. And in September last year, the government agreed, and this is the wording of what is now in the Act, saying that a local plan must take into account a local nature recovery strategy in its area. So this was a major reform and win, which we were delighted to get, and will hopefully make sure that LNRSs really have some bite when it comes to planning matters. Now, there is, of course, an obvious question here. Will this run into huge problems with housing, which the planning system also delivers, but also some of the other land uses that we require as a country, food production, for example? Is it the case that a site which could be very good for housing could be ruled out because a group of ecologists say that it could maybe be a good future home for a family of voles? Well, no, that's not going to happen. As the wording of this amendment makes clear, this makes LNRSs one part of the planning balance. It's one factor which local authorities will need to consider. So, to mix metaphors, it doesn't put nature in the driving seat, it just puts nature at the table as these considerations are being made. Now, obviously, local planning authorities will need to weigh up these different factors, and they could do with some guidance on how to do so. We're still waiting for that guidance. When the government made this amendment 6 months ago, they did say guidance would be coming as to how LNRSs could apply to planning. We are still waiting for it. We are still chasing it, and we're making it quite clear to government that the full potential of this really good reform can only really be unleashed when that guidance is provided. Hopefully it will be soon. Now, just to pick up on a couple of other areas apart from planning that could make LNRSs a success. Funding won't be a surprise that we're saying funding is needed. This is from a paper that Link put together, I think back in 2021, suggesting that it would cost about 35 million to set up LNRSs. Government gave us 14 million, which actually, as government funding stuff goes, fairly reasonable. However, that is only up to 2025, and already some LNRSs are reporting that they really could do with some longer term funding. It can be quite difficult to recruit people to work on these things when there's quite a firm cliff edge date. So we're lobbying the government to agree longer term funding for LNRSs, which will help with recruitment and retention of vital staff. The government at the moment is saying, oh, we'll deal with it in the next comprehensive spending review. We don't know when that comprehensive spending review could be. It could even be in autumn 2025. So we'd really like to see some upfront funding for LNRSs, new upfront funding to come forward relatively soon. And the other area, which very much picks up on points Sam was making, is just the need to utilise expertise and the expert input that is out there in all of the LNRSs that are being prepared. So of our 83 members, we have members who are doing wonderful work providing very specific species and habitat advice. to help make sure that an LNRS really works. So you've got on the screen there, Bat Conservation Trust have got a great new guidance paper out on taking bats into account, and Ditto Plant Life have got a really good report out on how to make sure that plants and fungi come through strongly in LNRSs. So trying to make sure that all of these really good bits of advice are deployed in LNRSs will make a big difference. Linked to this is also the need to engage, and for LNRSs to engage not just with ENGOs, as lovely as we are, but to also help with engaging with farmers and land managers. A lot of LNRS land will be farmland. It's really important that it's got right. There is some government guidance that's been promised on how LNRSs and the new farming reforms will align. A bit of a common theme here. That guidance hasn't come forward yet. It would be really good to see it soon to try and make sure that farmers and land managers really enthusiastically take part in LNRSs and feel the confidence needed to enable them to do that. So just to conclude, just a reminder of what this could achieve. So this was a paper that we delivered to all MPs when we were campaigning for our species abundance target in 2021, showing what things could be like if it was actually met. If we halted the decline in species abundance by 2030, seeing hedgehogs thriving, seeing clean rivers, everything like that. Well, LNRSs, if we get them right, can help get us to that wonderful, wonderful end point, to having a series of LNRS maps across the country knitting together to form a blueprint for nature's recovery, benefiting wild species, wild plants and trees, benefiting climate and helping us reach net zero, and making sure we all live more joyful and nature-abundant lives. So the prize is there, and these reforms to make LNRSs work better. These are not impossible stuff. We're talking a little bit more money, bit of guidance. It can be done. We really like to see it done. LNRSs could make a huge difference. And that's it from me.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's really great to hear a success story in terms of getting changes to legislation. So thanks so much. Obviously, still, like you said, more to do. But yeah, really great to hear that success story. So now we're going to hear from our final speaker, Sachi. Sachi is served as the project manager for the Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes local nature recovery strategy for the past year and a half. She is a policy planner by training, and for the past 8+ years has worked in the environmental sustainability sector in 4 countries across roles in waste management, impact investing, and linking human and environmental health. So over to you, Sachi.
Thanks, Ali, for the invitation, and it was really interesting hearing from all the other speakers as well. So I hope a lot of what I'm saying is sort of familiar and in keeping with what you heard from the other speakers. So as Ali said, I'm Sachi. I'm the Bucks and Milton Keynes LNRS project manager, and I work for the local nature partnership for Bucks and Milton Keynes called the National Environmental Partnership. And so I will also be kind of talking to you from that perspective. Okay, so you heard already what the local nature recovery strategy is. I won't be repeating that, but just so you're aware, the responsible authority for Bucks and Milton Keynes is the Buckinghamshire Council, and the supporting authorities are Milton Keynes City Council and Natural England. So you already heard about the various delivery mechanisms for the LNRS, but I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about how we're approaching this locally, because every area has a sort of a different way of delivering BNG. And so I just want to tell you about how we're linking the LNRS and BNG. So the habitats for the Bucks BNG strategic significance reports have been based on something called the Biodiversity Action Plan for Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. So many areas across the country have delivered BAPs, and then we also have biodiversity opportunity areas. So for Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, this was put together in 2016, and so the Strategic Significance Report has taken into consideration these various sort of areas, habitats, species, etc., that were noted in these documents, and of course the biodiversity opportunity areas. And the LNRS is similarly going to be using the BAP as the basis for its description of nature, which is one of the steps in the LNRS. So previously there were a couple of BNG funds that were set up prior to sort of the latest guidance, where these sort of funds have now been stopped as of February of this year. But the funds that were collected previously will be allocated towards LNRS priorities. So we've already started taking expressions of interest for habitat banks, and in Bucks, we've already set up one habitat bank in collaboration with the Wildlife Trust. And these areas will also likely be mapped into our final LNRS. And so there will be opportunities or priorities within the LNRS around these habitat banks that already exist. And then ultimately the goal is that the LNRS will inform where future habitat banks go. Planning authorities, so the BNG officers particularly, are involved in the creation, the writing process of the LNRS, so there is that very keen link there already. In terms of environmental land management schemes, so these take into consideration or will take into consideration what LNRS priorities are when they sort of set out bids or take into consideration bids. We also have farmers involved in priority setting for the LNRS in our area, and I'll explain a little bit about how we're approaching that in the next slide. And then ultimately the guidance on the LNRS is from DEFRA and Natural England, so there is sort of an inherent link over there as well. In terms of how planning authorities can support the LNRS, we're still waiting on some guidance as to how these authorities are meant to have regard to the LNRS. But we're hoping that there is sort of a statutory requirement. So this is sort of just the stakeholders, a quick snapshot of the stakeholders that we've involved in our LNRS process. So we're looking at council officers from various different departments, so we can kind of, collate synergistic goals from various other plans and strategies, working with environmental organizations to kind of garner and sort of gain all of that expertise and knowledge from the ground as well. Farmers and landowners, key stakeholder in terms of the delivery mechanisms with respect to both BNG and the environmental land management schemes. Developers, again, similarly. And town parish councils and businesses and residents, of course. So yes, so these are sort of, and we're basing our opportunity areas on national character areas. There are 4 zones within our area. So how are we setting our LNRS up for success? So there are a few key points. Number 1, we have 3 rounds of stakeholder consultation. So we're going to be hosting workshops later this month, and in April, we're also going to be sending out a survey to a wider public group and to kind of gain input and kind of gain almost a sense check on the priorities that came out of these workshops that we run for the groups that I mentioned in the previous slide. We, again, are being really clear in our communications as to why the LNRS matters for particular groups, and therefore why they should participate in this process and how they can kind of use the LNRS in the future once it's actually written. We're also asking about the format and function of both the written statement and map, so that we can ensure that it is user-friendly, that everything from searchability functions to the scale of the map, etc., is appropriate for the various users of the LNRS. And we're asking our stakeholders during our upcoming workshops directly how they would like to see these pieces formatted. We'll also be producing some user guides and doing some additional promotion once we actually write the LNRS. So this is, again, to help people understand what are the different ways in which they can use the LNRS. And we're also, as you probably know, working with our neighboring authorities as well to understand sort of how we can align our various LNRSs and sort of share knowledge in terms of best practices, etc. So what's still needed? I think a lot of this has already been covered, but So as somebody who works for a local nature partnership, I suppose this is a bit, I have a bit of a vested interest here, but I do think that local nature partnerships are really important and have played a role in various different areas in delivering the LNRS. We're leading this project for Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. Local nature partnerships also have connections with various different organizations across the area usually, and have been kind of bringing these entities, public and private, together to deliver for nature. So they're kind of very well placed. Government funding, of course, you've heard a lot about it. We do, this is, we're writing the strategy at the moment, but funding for delivery besides the BNG and the ELMS mechanisms has not been sort of announced yet. We are having conversations to understand how, this can be done and sort of to try and push for funding. But that's definitely going to be key. Monitoring and evaluation, we do have to revise the LNRSs every 3 to 10 years. So sort of having a monitoring and evaluation plan for tracking what has happened over those 3 to 10 years is really crucial. And we'd love for there to be a statutory obligation to actually deliver the LNRS, the same way that there has been one to actually write it. There are also other market mechanisms, so green financing or setting up an LNRS fund that we could potentially look into as sort of various areas, etc. Or sort of as private entities as well. So yes, that's everything.